Awesome. What do we got here?
All right, so I have a little thing for you to taste. This is a demo to kind of show you like what it is that our flavors can bring to a product. So this is a nose clip.
Okay.
So you're gonna put this, like pinch your nose with it. Yep,
okay.
Go ahead. Now taste a jelly bean.
Just what?
Just one. Chew it. See what you think before you swallow. Release the nose clip.
Oh, wow.
So what did you experience when your nose was clipped?
Other than my breathing, but it tasted almost vanilla-y at first. And when I took the nose clip off, I was eating popcorn.
Yes.
It almost felt like.
Yes.
Was that right? Or
Yep.
was this a quiz?
Yep, exactly.
I passed?
Yeah. So when your nose is clipped, you're only getting the basic taste on your tongue in your mouth. So that would be sweet, sour, salt, bitter, and umami.
Oh, interesting.
So you shouldn't get any flavor. So if you got something vanilla-y, that's probably just your association or you kind of like thinking what it might be.
Because it's white, probably, the
Yep.
visual.
Yep. And then when you release it, that allows air to come through the back of your throat and the volatile components of the flavor travel up to the same place like where you would smell things.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because what I thought you were going to say, the portion that you did say, is that, you know, all your senses kind of work together for like an experience, but it never occurred to me that it's air coming from the back, like from inside my head.
Yep.
And not just what I can smell.
Yeah.
Right? Because you hear that a lot with wine tasting, right? Let it breathe and all that. So
yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So So what Edlong makes is flavors, and so that would be things that can go into food products that would give you those characterizing notes of it's cheesy or it's buttery. You know, it tastes like butter popcorn.
That's super cool. So I was right. This is sample 574.
Yes.
And these white jelly beans.
Yep.
That's awesome. Are you involved with the jelly bean Jamboozle game?
Oh, I have played that. Yes.
Is Edlong responsible for well, probably? I'm guessing you don't focus on making things that taste like wet socks or whatever the.
Well, if that's what our customer wants, we might. I would not want to do the sensory testing on the Bean Boozle game.
Yeah, Bean Boozle. That's
Bean
what it's
Boozle,
called.
Yeah.
Awesome, cool. Okay, set this down. What are these here?
Yeah, so these are some references that we use for different types of dairy flavor components. So this one is a nutty note.
Oh yeah, big time.
So these are actually like components that the flavorist would use within our flavor.
Okay.
So if we want to develop like a grass-fed milk, so that's a green grassy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's a compound called cis-3-hexanol. So that would be like one of the tools that they might use, but to come up with a flavor. This one's kind of an interesting one.
The name on this says Pukey.
Pukey.
I braced myself for this. Oh man, yeah. I won't tell a story about what that smells like.
But pukiness is something that you get in cheeses a lot, right?
Oh, that's true.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I like that that brings like some of the authenticity to like the experience that you're creating with the different flavors.
Yeah. So we use those references in a few different ways. So like from a sensory standpoint, I have to train my panelists. So we want to use people that are familiar with the different notes, and we do that by training them. So we would have those markers, they would sniff them, and then we would all align that is the term, that's how we're going to call pukey, or that's what we're going to call nutty.
Gotcha.
Or we could say, we feel like the nuttiness that we're tasting in this cheese is really more peanut-like or pecan-like.
Yeah.
So maybe we would need a different reference for like a specific type of nutty.
Interesting. And that does make sense because there's so many different variants of flavor, right? Like, I obviously I'm not experienced, so it tastes like vanilla. Like I don't have options. It's interesting that you have to codify those conversations. Well, Julie, usually it's my responsibility to come up with something interesting to start the conversation with. So I appreciate you showing me up on that, and that was more fun than my typical rambling questions.
I'm glad you passed the test.
And I passed the test too. Yeah. I'm an excellent taster.
Right.
My resume is in the mailbox. So before we get started, and I start talking about Edlong and the company and your role as well, I want to first talk about the room that we're sitting in a little bit. And part of this is we might hear some noises turning on and off, which I think is cool. One of my favorite things about this podcast is when I do get to do them on site is, my office building is an office building, right? There's rooms, everyone's on Zoom calls, that sort of thing. I just always get excited to be in what feels like a shop room, floor and machinery.
Yeah.
So would love to hear just a little bit about this room we're sitting in.
Yeah, so we call this our pilot plant area. So we have some different tools, different equipment in here that is used to make the flavor in some cases, like the spray dryer. Then we have a lot of equipment that we use to kind of like mimic food production so that we know that our flavor is like withstanding like a heat process that they might use for beverage development. Or that it's going to work the right way in a cracker or a fried application. So all of those different processes can affect the way the flavor comes out. So we want to make sure that we've tested it in those real life applications.
That's very cool. So before you're shipping it out and letting your customers see if it works, you're doing a lot of those tests in here and that sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, we might hear some fans turn on and on, and some machines pipe up and down. But to me, that adds to the excitement.
Yes, it's real life, what I'm dealing with all the time. So.
Awesome. So you quizzed me. I'm going to do a quick quiz for you.
Okay.
All right. This particular food item, 40% fructose,
Oh my gosh.
30% palmitic, and it actually uses yellow-orange E101.
Orange juice?
You're not supposed to know the answer to this. I was going to say ahead of time, the answer is banana. So you shared a post on, I think it was on LinkedIn, and it had all these chemical ingredients.
Yes.
And the takeaway that I thought, well done.
Yeah.
The takeaway was you were describing a banana.
Yes.
And when we think about the things that we eat and we think of the word chemical, I think it's such an important understanding that like we're made of chemicals, like that is, and all natural food is.
Yes.
And it just brought such it shed an interesting light on what you do here at Edlong in terms of recreating those things from a lot of the same building blocks. So that was my attempt at quizzing.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. No, I'm glad you pointed that out because I think it is so important because, chemicals, especially in food, really scare people.
Right.
But as you say, everything is made up of chemicals. So when you take a look at a banana or any natural product, food, that's what it's made up of. And so that's what we try to do to recreate flavors in a way that they can be sold, in food products, generally.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, all right, we kind of jumped right into some things. Would love to just kind of take a little bit of step back, start by learning a little bit about Edlong, your role, and then maybe we can discuss, some of the challenges that you're helping your clients with, so on and so forth. So, is it cool to start there?
Yeah, that's great. So Edlong is a flavor manufacturer. So the ingredient we sell to other food manufacturers is flavor. So that can usually look on your label when, as a consumer of natural flavor or natural and artificial or artificial flavor. So that's really what we sell. And we're specialized in dairy profiles. So that would be like cheeses, butter, milk and cream, and then kind of like sweet dairies. So whether that be caramel or dulce de leche, things like that.
Interesting. And so the types of clients that you're working with, and I won't ask you to, so I mean, there's probably some secrecy among that, but these are companies or brands that are bringing products to market. Are they? Would just kind of love to know the types of things they're coming to you with.
Yeah, so we can sell into all sorts of different food products that you would find in the grocery store or food service or restaurants. And that could be like, think plant-based milks or coffee creamers, beverages like that. Milk flavors would be used in like coffee, drinks, lattes, things like that. And then also like snack seasoning, so many different cheese profiles and different snacks. What else? All sorts of different products, cereals, plant-based cheeses,
Yep.
like that.
Interesting. And I said interesting because of the plant-based. So obviously a topic that comes in and out of many of our social lives, right, is a lot of the plant-based products that are coming to market. And I think you know this, I took a couple months last year and I watched some special, and it was plant-based versus meat-based, but the same diets. And I was like, I'm going to try this out, see what this is. I purposely knew I was only going to do it for about a month and a half or whatever. And so, but ate completely vegan. It was a fun experiment. I learned to stay away from the frozen food section. But during that, it seemed dairy is commonly the thing that makes it hard for people to convert to vegan. The substitutes for dairy ends up being one of the hardest. And for me, it was cheese, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't do it. Everything kind of relied on a cashew. So I remember getting bags and bags of cashews, and in fact, I don't know if I can eat cashews anymore. I ate so many cashews. But with that said, are you seeing any sort of trends in terms of the things that people are asking your organization to create in terms of flavor profiles? Is that challenge of things of cheese, right? Is that something that comes up for you all?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, for sure. And we kind of see waves of different things. So in the beginning, we worked a lot on plant-based cheese. And I would say the challenge there is we can get some really great flavors to come through, but it's all of the other ingredients. So the way the cheese melts, you have to use starches and fats and things to make up everything else. So it's not just the flavor, it's the whole experience, that changes. And then we also saw a lot of cream cheese, like plant-based cream cheese, sour cream, and then of course the milks as well.
Yep. Is there any one product that's doing better than the others that you're seeing? Like we've got milk figured out, but aged Gouda has been a challenge for people. Any sort of interesting trends like that?
I think some of the stronger cheeses, like cheddar, you might have a better chance of getting the profile right, at least. It's difficult when you look at mozzarella. Mozzarella is very neutral, like kind of a bland cheese in general. It's like milky. You don't have a lot to help you out on the flavor side. So then some of those, like I said, what we call the base notes, so the starch and the oil and the other ingredients that you're using. If people are trying to do a protein in there, that can get different off notes that then you need flavor, or flavor can help, to kind of cover up.
And that that touches on to, so we started with you running an experiment on me, and just in a conversation we've had before, so much more goes into flavor than just the taste of the substance.
Yep.
I would love to know a little bit more about kind of your role in the team that you lead, and how do you go about that? So, whatever the easiest way is to explain it, maybe of a recent time your team was developing a flavor, or if I walked in here and said, "Hey, I want to launch a new cheese," what types of questions am I getting asked? What types of things is the team doing? Just what did that process look like?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I didn't really say my role. I'm the director of sensory and innovation. So two kind of like different um, roles typically that are overlapping for me. But so on the sensory side, we're looking at, what does it taste like? Does it taste like this? How do we get it to taste more like this? So using like those kind of references to understand like where are the gaps in the flavor profile, and then that we can relate to the flavorists who then know what to add and to change things. And then on the innovation side, so we're kind of like looking a little bit deeper into ingredients. So,
Okay.
what are the ingredients that could be used to, let's say, like increase salt perception? That's something that we're working on right now. That's very big, of course, in the US, but especially in Mexico because they have some different labeling laws where they
Interesting.
have to put, they call it a black seal on the front of the pack if anything is like high in salt, sugar, or fat.
In Mexico,
In
that's a
Mexico.
thing. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So we want to look at flavors that could enhance the salt. They could reduce the sodium in their product so they don't have to have that label that consumers think it's a bad food now for me.
Right.
And then, but you could add something that's natural flavor onto your label, and then that would help with the overall profile.
Yeah.
I think that kind of answered your question.
No, yeah, no, that is interesting. Yeah. And so some of the stuff, so thanks again for the tour of the facility. I know this is only one of the locations.
Yeah.
But one of the areas that you took me through was a sensory, I'm going to call it sensory tasting lab. Yeah. To describe it, essentially an individual sits down, and there was like a window that would be opened and samples would be passed over, and there's a computer to kind of take it down. So what are some of the things that I'd love to know more about that process. Are they just taking a sip and saying, I like it, I don't like it? Or are they trained, and what types of...
Yeah. So I think typically like when I explain to people my job that I'm a sensory scientist and I run taste tests with people is like an easy way to say it.
Right.
People immediately want to give their feedback on something. So how much they like it, why they don't like this product, what they would change. So that's a type of test called a consumer test. So that's getting consumer feedback to try to improve your product.
Okay.
So typically that's done with a finished product in the food world because you have something ready to go. You want to know how it's going to respond with your consumers. So because Edlong is like a B2B company, we don't always have our end product that we want to test with consumers. So what we do here for our sensory team is a bit more like internally focused. So you could think about it like analytical type testing in nature. So we use different methods and panelists to try to define our product. So there's a few different methods that we use. One is called a discrimination test. So that's done to try to understand if products are similar or different. So when you think about like cost savings, you might need to replace a raw material, but you don't want your consumer, your customer, to know that there's a difference. You want it to be seamless.
Right.
So we would run testing to ensure that people don't see a difference there.
Interesting. Okay.
And we do that with trained panelists. So our panelists are employees. So we've screened them. We know that their like basic sensory acuity is up to a level where we think they would be good participants. And then we also train them. So we train them in that method. So like they understand what your task is
Yeah.
from a testing perspective. And then, so that's kind of like one panel. And then we have like, this is called like a higher level panel, which is they are a little bit more trained on like the actual terms. So they understand like the different nuances of cheese and the different profiles that we would use. And then that is a panel called a descriptive analysis panel. And they're also highly trained to a scale. And with that panel, we can kind of like pick apart different products or flavors. So they're like, say we would look at a plant-based cheddar cheese, and we want it to taste more like a real cheddar cheese. So we could profile both of those and know that the intensity of the sweaty note is a bit lower, and we want to up that.
Okay.
The intensity of the sourness, if you think about like basic taste, you could look at that too. And then also, we are very focused on flavor, but you can also look at texture that way too. So
Okay.
we could say this cheese is a bit gummier or softer, you know, things like that as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that we use a lot to kind of like create a flavor in a different direction, right? So if we want to match like something different.
So I got questions.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I've ever heard of a flavor being described as sweaty before. And I want to dive in here. So my industry has some words too that I find funny or interesting.
Yeah.
My favorite one is information scent. So we're talking about like, you know, building a website or something. If the person has a good idea of where to go somewhere, it's because you're leaving a nice information scent. That's always like a fun word.
I like that, yeah.
And it might be part of my personality, but I love knowing those fun words in different industries so I can act like I know what I'm talking about. But sweaty profile. Tell me a little bit about some of the nomenclature or some of those words that your team uses. If I wanted to sound as professional as the people here going through one of those taste tests, what are some of the fun ones?
Yeah, I mean, sweaty is one, pukey.
Pukey.
Like those, yeah, and those two are often together. Like you can, if you get one, sometimes you get the other, you know?
Yeah.
And those are actually like different acids. So,
Okay.
So pukey would be like a butyric acid.
Oh, okay.
Then that's, you know, one of the things that's known for that. And sweaty is like isovaleric acid. So different.
I love isovaleric acid.
And I mean, those are naturally occurring in cheeses.
Okay.
Right. So that's why you get some of those different notes. Other kind of interesting terms. I mean, cabbage, eggy, those sound normal when you smell them. Like sometimes those are the ones that if I'm carrying these little pens around in my bag or something that like you just want to get rid of, you know? I mean, that'll start stinking up the place.
Do you, and so speaking of that, and also I'm just thinking of cheese. So if I look at my own family, I love the stinky cheese.
Oh yeah.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I might be the only person.
Yeah.
Now, when someone is an employee here and it's their job to taste it, is that a thing where they can say, I'm out for this? Or are certain people or they just have to grin and bear it, whatever they're tasting?
You know, I would say blue cheese is probably one that is like very polarizing, right?
Yeah.
So that is one. People are usually professional to say, I don't like this, but I'm going to do it for you, you know, kind of thing.
Do you make the new person has to do all the pukey tests?
Yes,
and
yep. But yeah, I mean, we try to leave liking out of it. But there are, you know, if I know somebody doesn't like like something I will try to leave them out of that panel. You know?
So, okay. So in your role, coordinating, organizing, um, making sure that the sensory experience and the flavoring and everything else like that, and getting all of this data, what does that look like? And I like asking the question, what's something that you spend an unexpected amount of time on that one might not think?
Two things, I guess. When you say the data piece, we didn't really touch on that, but like, so when all of this data is collected, right? Like we're asking people to rate things on scales. That's definitely another piece to the sensory world, is running the statistics on it. So, you know, making sure that that data is accurate, but then, you know, what does it mean? So,
Sure.
you know, so I would say that. And then another thing would be like setting up the test. So typically, you know, for a sensory test, you would have, I don't know, 100 little cups filled like with your three-digit code. So we put a 3-digit code on it so that doesn't bias people. And then you have to fill up every one of those little cups, you know, with whatever you're testing. So that's definitely a time suck.
I would imagine. In my world, we do a lot of like usability testing, you know, where we want to see how are people using this digital product or something. And it's there's an art and science to it, because you know, we always have, there's an old Henry Ford saying, if you ask people what they want, they're going to say more horses, right? But then the other side of that is not wanting to lead the witness. So I find we do a lot of things so that people they know the task, but then we try to limit all other variables. And so it sounds like, for instance, everyone's cup's probably the same size. And what are some of those things that you do to limit that environment?
Exactly, yeah, because there's that psychology piece to it, right? So you want to make sure that you're not leading people, you're asking them questions in a way where you're getting the real response. So like in your case, you don't want them to be trying to prove to you that they can, you know, navigate these things. You want to know like how they would really use it. So that's kind of a big part of the sensory science field, is that a lot of the methods that we use take that into account. So when I talked about the discrimination test, we use a method called the tetrad test. So you have 2 control and 2 tests, and they're mixed up, and then people are trying to group them into, you know, 2 similar groups. And so you have a chance of getting that right by chance, right? So that is taken into account when you run the statistics of, you know, of things.
Interesting.
And then another thing, like the visual is so important. So like we're just testing flavor, so we often don't care about the visual, but that makes a difference. You look at those jelly beans and you see yellow, you're automatically going to think it's lemon or something. So
in fact, that happened to me. I said vanilla because they're to me they're white, but my eyes are a little bit off. They're yellowish white, to be fair. And I was going to ask, like, do you ever like change the color but everything else the same to, you know, throw them for a loop type of thing? Or
I mean, actually kind of the opposite. I mean, we could do that, but we actually, like, so in those booths where we do the sensory testing, there's red lights in them. So you can change the color of the light. So
interesting.
if you know that there's a color difference, but you don't want to take that into account, you just want people to focus on the flavor, you turn those red lights on, it masks the color difference, and then you're able to, you know, get a read on just the flavor without that taken into account.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. That's funny. I installed color changing light bulbs in our kitchen. And we'll, you know, Alexa, kitchen, color purple, right? And then our food just looked crazy. And it was hard to eat in there. Okay, that's very interesting. So, what are some of the so as a consumer, I am aware, and I think I said this already, but I'm aware that there's a lot of trends towards plant-based food. I'm aware that dairy has been a challenge. What are kind of the big conversations that are coming up with your clients or in the industry, that sort of things? What is the flavor industry talking about right now?
Yeah, I mean, I like this question because like this is kind of originally why I got into this field
Yeah,
because my education was all in nutrition. So I studied dietetics and but I really kind of saw that gap as, you know, people won't eat things if they don't taste good.
right.
Right. So I love like the sensory field because, you know, we're really kind of like getting into like, how can we make it taste better? You know, we know consumers are looking for less sugar, higher protein, um, less salt, less sodium. But if it doesn't taste good, you're not going to buy it again,
Right.
right? Um, so I do think like those are kind of still like the hot things. Like there's a lot of ingredients people look to add, like beneficial ingredients. Protein is still, I would say, number one, and it's one of the most challenging. So we see that a lot. Like our flavors are good for masking, so like
Okay.
kind of covering some of those off notes that you would get. Like pea protein is still big. Like that was one that we work on a lot. Um, and then reducing sugar. So you take out the sugar. It's not only in there for the sweetness, but it's also like adds function. So that can create issues with things. But yeah, we can also then add flavor. So if you think about it, you added a vanilla flavor, that's going to give your mind kind of like trick your mind into thinking it could be sweeter, you know, than, or
Yeah.
it just tastes good now, you know,
Right.
like,
Um, so interesting on that, and I've heard you say this before, but food texture has a. I mean, I guess a lot of people have said this, but texture has so much to do with it. How much is so if you are developing the flavor and you're delivering it to the client, and the texture something that you play a role in with them, or is that kind of on them to figure out? I would just love to know how texture plays into some of your
yeah.
processes.
So typically our customers will give us like their ingredients that they're using and
Hmm.
that they modify the texture. Um, but I will say we've been doing a lot of research into like how aroma plays a part in this, and you kind of touched on that too, like the whole eating experience.
Hmm.
Um, so I've been really surprised with like the research that I've seen is that it plays a big part. So we call it like a cross-modal interaction. So
Okay.
although you get, when you pinch your nose, you only get the basic taste, it still changes the perception. So we could, from like descriptive analysis panel, we could say like the intensity of the sweetness intensity of that jelly bean when your nose is pinched is a 5. And then when you release it and you get flavor to come with it, maybe it would go up to a 7.
Okay.
So you can change the perception of different things like with other sensory modalities, you
Right.
know? Yeah. And one that we've seen is a textural component, I guess, is like when you think about what's creamy.
Hmm.
So to me, like that's not a good term because it can mean so many different things and there's
Sure.
like a lot that goes into that. But we can see that adding a cream flavor to something can increase a consumer's perception of creaminess,
Oh,
which I think
interesting.
is really cool because you would think that is just a textural feeling that you get,
Right.
whereas like just the aroma compounds can change that.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, so your job's getting harder and harder the more that I
Yeah.
think about this because
Yeah.
on the surface, flavor. Okay, that sounds easy.
Yeah.
To an amateur.
Yeah.
But all the different variables that impact how that flavor is perceived, I would imagine that's got to be challenging in terms of how it's perceived in the end consumer as you're delivering to clients, I've certainly been in situations where the thing that we were doing was great, and then how it was handled maybe wasn't the best or whatever. But there's all these variables that you can't. It seems like you might not be able to control all those different things
Completely.
in the
Yeah.
delivery. Um, that is so interesting. What, and if you don't have an answer for this, I apologize. What has been the hardest type of a flavor to deliver,
Hmm.
or a challenging flavor?
Like cultured dairy notes come to mind.
Yeah.
That would be like, I mean, buttermilk is like a good reference for that, but like also like cream cheese, sour cream. Um, it's just like a very like delicate flavor note, I feel like, and but we've definitely had some luck in creating that,
Yeah.
that note.
Interesting. Very cool. So dairy in particular, um, there's a common saying on, rather than try and be great at everything, pick one thing and be
Yeah.
the best. Is there a story behind how Edlong decided to focus on dairy among all other things?
Yeah. So we have been around for over 100 years, and our roots, I guess, started in like dairy compounding,
Okay.
with dairy ingredients, and that was kind of where it all started, and that's just like why they continued to focus on that. Our chemists are specialized in dairy, which is unique, different. It's not everybody gets that into it, I guess, like in depth. So yeah, it's been a good place for us, I guess, over the years.
Absolutely. And does so walking around the halls here, I noticed a lot of cow art.
Yes.
And the question, I think I might know part of the answer. So there are no cows amongst us
No.
in this room.
No.
And I thought to myself, are they being cute, or do cows kind of play into, that's what I think most people think of as dairy.
Yeah.
In terms of products that you're creating, do they play a role?
No, I think it's just just the dairy piece. We do have a conference room called the barn, but you're right, we don't have any cows in there. No, I think it's just kind of a play on,
Awesome. It's such an interesting industry. So, for folks listening to this, I guess another question I have is, sometimes when you know a lot of information about a certain kind of niche area, it makes it, like, I would imagine if I was an airline pilot, going to the airport with my family is a totally different experience than it would be for someone who's not.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that are top of mind in kind of being so heavily involved? Like, is it possible for you to get out a piece of cheese and just eat it? Or are there things you think about? Are there things that we should be thinking about?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I can really like turn it off, like, so we can go out to dinner and like, I'm not going to critique every little thing. But there's definitely people in my industry, in even here, that are a bit more critical and, I feel like have a harder time turning it off. So we'll go to a sensory conference and, you go out to dinner or to lunch and everybody's talking about, the different things that they know about, from their industry. But I do feel like too, that's something that we try to make sure that it's standardized when we're doing sensory tests, and there's a reason for that, right? So like, that's why we have this room where we do our sensory testing, and it has better ventilation, so you're not getting all the smells in there, and the lighting is standardized, and all of that, because you want to try to eliminate all of those outside things that can trickle in. So if you're at a restaurant, you might feel a certain way, but then if you had it in this controlled area, you might notice different things. And so I
100%.
feel like that about myself. Like I'm a better taster when I'm in that zone, you
Yeah.
know? Like,
Well, I can say I'm a better cheese taster when I've got a bottle of wine.
yes. It's
maybe
just what
maybe
you're,
not a whole bottle, but
yeah,
the pairing of the wine.
maybe that's what you're used to. I'm used to my sensory zone. You're used to your,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, it's funny because you mentioned mozzarella, and you're like, which doesn't really have a taste. I never thought about it, but it doesn't. It kind of doesn't.
Yeah.
Yet I want more of it.
Yes.
Why is that?
Yeah. I mean, it's just the perfect combination, right? It's the fat, it's
Yeah.
the salts, you know,
Yeah.
all the things.
It's got all the good stuff in there that everyone wants us to take out,
Right.
and you're solving the mozzarella problem
Right.
with the flavoring. Awesome. So, a couple things that I'd love to get some insights on is there anything kind of coming down the pike in this type of market? Are we on some major trend or breakthrough? Or you mentioned the sensory conferences and people are all talking.
Yeah.
What is kind of the future of the world of flavoring and things like that? Is there anything to be thinking about that are top of mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's really exciting things going on. I mean, there is a huge consumer push for healthier foods,
Right.
so that's great. You know, that's how it's going to get done, because if people have to still buy it, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of research being done in that space. The other thing would be like more sustainable foods. So that's also a push from consumers, you know, like people are looking for that sort of thing. How we can feed the, you know, global population in 20, 50 years. So there's a lot of interesting research in fermentation, like cellular grown ingredients, things like that. So we look at that in dairy, especially.
Okay.
So one of the things that I've seen, because I've tasted some of these products, is that right now they're growing individual components, say, of dairy.
Okay.
So you could have a cellular grown casein, but it's still not milk.
Right.
It's just one component of milk. So then that component has to go into something. So it really kind of still tastes like a plant-based milk.
Sure.
Because they're still using oils or other things to build out that whole milk. So I think when we get to the point where, you know, the entire milk, you know, is
still reachable.
Yeah, that's going to be really cool. And I hope consumers come along with that, you know,
Yeah.
that it's okay. It's still healthy, you know, it's still a great product, and people aren't afraid of that sort of thing. But
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's interesting because obviously food supply and everything I mean, since the dawn of time, right, has been something that changes cultures and civilizations and everything else, and has a lot to do with you know, the entire economy, right?
Yeah.
is tied to food. It's one thing you got to do, right?
Yep.
Is eat and get your protein. What I think is really interesting, and I never really thought about it until this conversation, as we were talking earlier, is coming up with these different flavors, all the things that's actually enabling for society. So one of the things you mentioned several times was cost savings.
yeah,
I think we were talking about aged cheese and how long that takes if we could come up with that differently.
yeah,
And that ultimately impacts the consumer. Another thing you had mentioned was shelf life,
yeah,
right? It's something I never thought about
yeah.
is the milk that's available at school. I thought that's milk.
Yeah.
I didn't, you know, so
Yeah.
what are some other things that you've seen coming up with the different flavorings that are enabling? And I might have just covered the two big ones.
You did. You did. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just like in general, like some of those issues. So, you know, people say like, why wouldn't you just add a strawberry to make it taste like a strawberry? Like, why
Right.
do you need flavor to do that? And it's, you know, because of the processing and, you know, a lot of a lot of different things, like how, yeah, do you want it to be shelf stable? Does it have to be refrigerated? Processing, so like, is it heated so you lose the flavor, or you don't want that textural component? Food safety, is another one. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. Okay, so kind of looking at the world, and also kind of the world, looking at the world of Edlong,
Mm-hmm.
right? And also your day to day. What are some of the things that I like to ask a question that keep you up at night? Hopefully nothing,
Yeah.
but in terms of thinking about the job or some of the bigger challenges or things in that, because I mean, right now you're balancing like 10,000 different things with the environmental effects of saying yes, we nailed it on a flavor. What are some of the things that come to mind with that?
I guess like one of the pieces of innovation which I really like is the research aspect.
Okay.
So we can look at one ingredient here, one ingredient here, one ingredient here, but what happens when we use those in combination? Can we get a synergistic effect that would really like make it so much better? There's so many different variables that you can look at. So I like that kind of like designing an experiment, running the testing, trying to decide then like what you do with that data, what you do with the information. It sometimes like can feel very like overwhelming, like there's so many different things to test, right? But,
oh yeah.
But I kind of like getting into that,
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then, so, I mean, I could only imagine. So occasionally I'm the one cooking at home.
Yeah.
And I'm a taster.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
I kind of keep, I probably shouldn't advertise it. Of course, new spoon every time.
New spoon, yeah.
But what are some of the things that maybe come up as you're kind of narrowing in on something? So is it more science and running statistics and analysis? Or is it, when do we say, let's bring in the people?
Yeah. That's kind of actually come up recently, where let's bring in the people earlier on, like if we know that we have a customer that might be interested in this technology that we've just done proof of concept testing. We haven't tested it in all the applications and all the things. But maybe we bring it to that customer and say, do you want to partner with us here? Or, because they have the consumers that then will tell them if that's good, if it's, needs work. So I think sometimes it can kind of be like a balancing act, right? Like how much work do you want to do ahead of time, or do you want to try to bring it out to your people sooner,
Yeah. And I have to ask, so I know that a lot of you said you're using employees and stuff like that. Is that a full-time job for someone to come in and taste all day, or you've got different folks doing multiple things? And
yeah, so for us, they have other jobs.
Okay.
So it might be an hour a day.
Gotcha.
At the most, yeah, that they would come in. But there are definitely people out there. There's sometimes people have like what they would call like outside panelists or whatever, that would be their job. So they would come in just to do sensory testing. They get paid for that, and then they move on.
I feel like that would be a cool job.
Yes. Yeah.
Or horrible, depending how it all goes. Okay. Well, awesome. This has been totally fascinating to learn everything that kind of goes on here, and it's. I appreciate the tour too. I almost wish we could walk around and bring the camera with. Okay. But for everyone else, I got a tour of multiple labs. We've got test kitchens. We've got a whole room of different ovens and cooking. And I thought that was just such a fascinating thing that when the product that you're delivering has dependency on your client, mm-hmm. on what they're going to do with it, the amount of things that they eventually do with it that you're doing here first to also build that into the process
Exactly.
is something that I had never really thought of before, but makes a whole lot of sense.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So in closing, in your group and in your role, if someone came in and said, hey, Julie, guess what? We're going to add $10 million to your budget this year. What are ideas that come to mind that you think would be interesting in terms of improving the job, other than cashing the check and going home, right?
Yeah. So consumer testing, as we kind of talked about, like we don't do that as so much here,
Yep.
But it can be expensive because you need to bring all these people in, you need to manage that. But I think it's a great area of like understanding the market, trends, things like that. So I guess that is where I would want to spend my money is kind of like understanding what drives a consumer to like this cheese versus this cheese in, you know, a plant-based application versus a dairy application versus a chip or something.
Yeah.
You know, so I'd like to kind of like understand a bit more about like how consumer profiles or consumer liking kind of pairs with profiles that we have. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Anytime I ask that question, and I don't know if it's a trick question,
yeah,
but depending on the one thing that is consistent that comes out of people I ask it to is you get kind of to the core of what's on their mind in the product or service or job or whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you're the right person for the job if you land on humans.
Right. Right.
how do you know, hey, I made this taste like, but do people like it?
Yeah.
It does really come down to that. So
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Julie, thanks so much for the time.
Yeah.
And for the tour and for the taste testing and the nose clamp.
Yes. Yeah. You can take that home to your kids.
All right, you don't want to put that one back in the mix for somebody else?
No.
All right.
No.
Awesome. Thanks so much. This is great.